What if a cloud could wipe every electronic whisper from the world, making phones, satellites, and even the glow of a traffic light disappear in an instant? The headline in the local paper that morning painted the sky over the Pacific with that image, a grey ribbon curling through the clouds, silent as a secret, with no sound or light to betray its presence. The meteorologists called it the silent storm, a rare atmospheric phenomenon that erased the electromagnetic signature of anything it brushed over. Mira, a data scientist at the Coastside Research Center, stared at the screen in disbelief. She had spent the last 3 years sorting numbers that mapped ocean currents, but now a weather pattern could erase every digital trail she had ever built. Mira's life had become a cycle of data and coffee. She lived in a small apartment above the library, paid the rent with a careful spreadsheet, and took on extra shifts at the lab to keep the lights on. The world outside her window moved at a pace she couldn't keep up with, and each day she felt more like a spectator than a participant. The silent storm felt like a door opening into an unknown room, and she wondered if, by stepping through, she could escape the sameness that had settled into her routine. She didn't have a plan, she just had curiosity, a mind that turned questions into projects. What if the storm could erase memories, she thought as she watched the cloud curl into the distance. What if it could erase a crime or a secret that someone doesn't want anyone to know? She remembered her brother who had gone missing years ago and how no one seemed to remember him. The storm's power seemed almost a blessing to some, a curse to others. Mira spent the afternoon at the lab pulling up satellite footage of the storm. The images were grainy, but she could see the faint outline of the cloud moving like a living thing. She plotted the storm's trajectory on a screen, overlaying it on a map of data streams, cell towers, Wi-Fi networks, satellite feeds. Where the cloud crossed, the signals disappeared. A blinking dot where a cell tower was meant to glow was gone. The map looked like a patchwork of darkness on a bright background. She turned to her colleague, Arun, a friend from college who worked in the same building. He was more interested in physics than in data, but he had a knack for seeing patterns. "It's like the storm is a blanker," he said. "It wipes the signal. But why? And who would use that?" She found a faded note from a scientist named Dr. Lila, who had studied atmospheric anomalies in the 1980s. The note mentioned electromagnetic null zones and hinted that some storms could carry invisible currents. That night, Mira dreamed of a grey ribbon slicing through a neon city, turning the bright lights into darkness. She woke up with a taste of metal in her mouth and a decision she would track the silent storm and find out who was using it. The next morning, Mira set up a small array of inexpensive sensors on the rooftop. She wired them to her laptop, hoping to catch the storm's approach in real time. The sensors sent bursts of data, tiny packets that flickered on her screen as the storm drew near. When the cloud brushed over, the data stopped. For a brief moment, Mira saw a ghostly echo on the screen, a flicker that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. She began to notice a pattern. The storm didn't just erase any signal, it erased signals in a specific order, as if it were following a script. When she overlaid the storm's path with the timeline of a series of data breaches that had occurred in the past week, a strange coincidence emerged. Each breach happened just before the storm moved over that region, and each time the stolen data vanished from the digital trail as the cloud passed. Mira's heart raced. Could someone be using the storm to smuggle data? She thought. She dug deeper, reading more old journals, talking to a retired researcher named Leo, who had once worked with Dr. Lila. Leo was cautious, but he whispered, "The storm's pattern isn't random. There's a rhythm to it, like a code." Mira felt the edges of her world widen. She was no longer just a data analyst. She was a detective in a story that stretched across the sky. One evening, as she watched the storm close in, she heard a soft click on the rooftop. A package had been left at the base of the building. Inside was a small device that looked like a satellite dish, but it was oddly shaped and contained a chip that hummed when Mira held it. Leo had warned her that some groups had been buying data on the silent storm. She sensed that someone wanted to turn the storm into a tool of power. Mira realized that if the storm could erase data, it could erase the world's digital infrastructure. And now, the grid, the internet, the records that kept society running could vanish in a moment, leaving humanity stranded in a pre-digital age. She felt a wave of fear and responsibility wash over her. The same storm that could free people from surveillance could also erase all progress. She set up a plan. She would intercept the storm's path and broadcast a counter signal from the rooftop. If she could create a small burst of electromagnetic noise at the exact moment the storm passed, she might disrupt its nulling effect. It was risky, but she had no other choice. She called Arun and Leo, telling them the truth. The storm was being weaponized, and they had to stop it before it wiped out the world's digital life. The storm moved like a living thing across the horizon, painting a grey ribbon that grew longer with each passing hour. Mira's sensors went silent, and she could see nothing but darkness. On the rooftop, she pressed the button, and a burst of light shot up into the sky. The storm flickered as if surprised, and for a brief second, the sensors sent data again. The storm retreated, but it left a smudge of static that lingered in the air. The chase was over for now. But the storm was still out there, a silent creature moving across the sky, erasing everything in its path. The shadowy cabal had learned that it could smuggle data, and they would not give up so easily. The world had to decide whether to let the storm continue or to find a way to control it. Mira stood on the rooftop looking at the horizon. The sky was a mix of blue and grey, a reminder of the delicate balance between light and darkness. She thought about the memories of her brother, the secrets that the storm could hide, and the power of the invisible currents that ran through the world. She wondered if the silent storm would someday be a force of liberation, erasing the oppressive data that trailed humanity, or a weapon that would lock us into a forgotten past. She turned to the rooftop garden, where small plants struggled to grow in the damp soil. She imagined that, just like the silent storm, nature had its own hidden ways of changing the world, ways that people could harness or ignore. The story she had lived through would stay with her, a reminder that sometimes the most powerful tools are those we barely understand. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, she whispered to the wind, "What if we choose to listen instead of fight?" And the wind carried her words away, into the darkening sky, leaving her with the thought that the silent storm, like any secret, could be a doorway or a trap, depending on who opened it.
Found this interesting? Subscribe to the channel. Give this video a like, share it out, and drop your questions or ideas in the comments. Until our next adventure.